I am Father Stephen Maxfield. I am the parish priest of the Greek Orthodox Church here in Shrewsbury. We are having a festival because it is the 1700th anniversary of the First Ecumenical Council, and our church in Sutton is dedicated to those fathers. And amongst the things that we have done, we have got this icon exhibition, which has been arranged by Aidan Hart. Some of the icons are by him, some of the icons are by his students, and I think there are some that are just good icons. They are all new, aren't they? They're all new. They've been produced soon. Aidan is a very good speaker. He has been an iconographer for 40 years, something like that. He is an astonishingly competent artist. So he can carve, he can do mosaics, he can design embroideries, he can paint icons, he can carve, he can do your head in bronze if you're keen. So all these things that you can do. So I will hand over to him. Aidan, you're on.
Thank you. Well, thank you for making the effort to come here, everyone. I hope you find it worth your while. The last 3 talks I've given during this exhibition have been about the inner meaning and the use of the icon, the meaning of beauty, and so forth. Today we're going to be talking more about how they are made, but thinking about what I could say today, the practicalities of an icon, what it's made of, is always related to its theology and its use in the church. So I'm going to be going between matter and spirit a lot. I can never explain the technique of icons without talking about the theology. And I think this relates very much to this icon here, the Annunciation, and the icons of Christ, because Christ is fully God and fully man. He's flesh and spirit. You probably know that wonderful verse in the Bible, the Word became flesh. God, who's invisible, ineffable, becomes a little baby. You can see the nativity icon there, this little baby wrapped up in white clothes. At the same time, he's the creator of the universe. So all the time, we're going to go between matter and spirit, and this is a good thing. So let's go through the phases of making an icon. The very first thing, of course, is to design it. I have here 2 drawings of icons, one of which I've made. You can see the icon at the back there of St Lawrence, and this one I'll be making soon. So I'll talk a bit about the process of making an icon. The word icon, as you probably know, is a Greek word meaning image. So unlike modern art, where the artist just thinks, well, what do I want to express? What are my feelings or my philosophies? An iconographer is really a portraitist. So we're serving the saint, serving the angel, serving Christ, whom we're painting. So the ego's got nothing to do with it. In fact, most iconographers don't sign their name at all. Looking around these icons, not one of them has the name of the painter on, and that's deliberate. On the sheets, they've probably all been taken now, but I made sheets with the number and title of each icon, and that did give the name of the painter. But in general, as I've often said in these talks, icons are doors between heaven and earth. So a carpenter who makes a door doesn't paint his face all over it and write his name over the door. He just wants to make a door which you can walk through and go into a room. So when I designed this icon of St. Lawrence, all the time I was thinking, well, how can I best depict who St. Lawrence was? This is for a university in America, Concordia at Chicago, and I'll be taking it over there in October. They were quite specific about the things that they wanted included in this icon. Sometimes people just say, can you do an icon of St. Lawrence for me? And you get on with it. But they wanted a number of things. If you don't know the life of St. Lawrence, he was a deacon in Rome. And deacons then were like the treasurer. They had control over the money, mainly to give alms. So he lived in the 4th century, I think, or 3rd century. And he was the deacon of Rome, and Rome was quite wealthy then. So during a time of persecution, the emperor, or an emissary of the emperor, this is the soldier here, the legate, said to Lawrence, "Give me the wealth of the church." In other words, give me all the gold and the money. So Lawrence said, "All right then, but give me 3 days to collect it." So he went around and gave all the money away to the poor, and gathered the poor and the blind and the sick, and then after 3 days presented the poor and the blind and the sick to the legate, saying, "Here is the wealth of the church." So of course that didn't go down very well with the legate, so he had Lawrence burnt. It's the price for being a Christian. It's quite complicated. I had to include a number of things. Why he was martyred, the poor and the ill, because this is going to be put near a hospital. But the important thing with an icon is not to tell a story about a person who lives in the past, because we believe in the Orthodox Church that the saints are alive and present with us. This isn't a picture of a man who lived 1800 years ago, and I've just got to imagine his life. Lawrence is alive in Christ. That's one reason why we have icons in the church, or frescoes. When we go in to start a service, we're not really starting the service. We're just joining in the ceaseless worship of heaven. There's only one church, not two, one in heaven, one on earth. So an icon must always bring us into relationship with the saint depicted. So I didn't want him just a little small person mingled in with all thousands of other people. So that's why I've made him in the middle. He's looking at us, and he's larger than the others. On the other hand, the commissioner wanted a bit of his life, so I balanced it, the 2 figures there, 2 figures here. So that's the challenge, really. An icon is an image of a saint, or also of an event in Christ's life. So this has got quite an unusual shape, because it's to fit into what's called a reredos that already exists in an Anglican church. So I had this shape here, and I had to fit it in. So in this particular one, I wanted to include more than just the transfiguration. Jesus went up a mountain with 3 of his disciples, and he was transfigured. He shone with light, and Moses and Elijah appeared with him. I also wanted to show that this act of shining with light and glory was like a prophecy of his second coming again. So here, I've got these brightly coloured clouds here, which are a symbol of Christ's return, like the sun rising. And to add emphasis to that glorious second coming, I've got 2 angels here with trumpets. The church this is for, in Chiswick, is called the Church of St Michael and All Angels. So that's why I included this. So you can see the icon tradition has a continuity to it. You know straight away if something's an icon or secular painting. But on the other hand, I'm not a glorified photocopier. You're relating to the commissioner, as we saw. This is, in one sense, this is a completely new icon. And in another sense, it's part of the tradition. But here, I wanted to relate it to the church. Obviously, the shape relates it to that particular space it's for. The angels, which you don't normally have in the Transfiguration, related the icon to this particular church, and so on. So that's the first thing. And I think an iconographer should be skilled, so there's the technical side, but also they should live a life within the church, because I don't want to just, as I said, paint St. Lawrence as a man who happened to live a long time ago. I want to paint a man I know and love. So in the life of the church, coming to the services, listening to the hymns, venerating the icons, reading spiritual books, reading the scriptures, you come to know the saints personally. So really you're doing a portrait of someone who's in front of you. As Father Stephen said, I do portrait sculpture sometimes. And really I insist on having sittings with the person. It's very different then, because their personality impinges on you, and you know what to exaggerate, what's of secondary importance. So that's the design. So what next? You make the wooden panel. Why do you think this batten is in the back here? Anyone guess? Stop it warping, that's right. But wood is a living thing. Even though it's a dead bit of wood, it still responds to the moisture. The grain runs this way. It's not going to expand and contract this way, but it will across the grain. So if I put this in a really moist room, it's going to expand. If it's a really dry room, it will contract. So if I just screwed that batten in, what would happen to this wood if it wanted to contract? It would split, wouldn't it? but it's screwed in and it wants to contract and it can't, so it will split. So you'll notice this really cunning device. This is slightly tapered and it's also dovetailed. It's actually jammed in. There's no glue. It's just jammed in really hard. So the wood can expand and contract freely because there's no glue, no screws, but it won't warp because this is stronger than that wood. Isn't that cunning? And if it's a bigger icon, you might have two. Sorry. Yeah, I tried to have a really hard wood here. That's oak. And this is tulip wood or lime wood. There is woods, yeah. I have done some in oak. In fact, the icon of Christ over there, that's solid oak. And you'll notice there's a bit of a crack at the bottom. That's because oak has to be perfectly dry. Has a lot of strength in it, so it's more likely to crack a bit because if it's not perfectly dried first, you can get differential expansion and contraction. And you notice that it's hollowed out. Now, this isn't stuck on wood on the outside. This is actually hollowed out. I use a router now, but in the old days, and I've done it once or twice, you chisel it out. Interestingly, that raised part is called a kivatos, which is the Greek word for ark. Can anyone think of, in the Old Testament, there are two arks? What were they? What was one of the arks in the Old Covenant? The Ark of Noah. That was to save people, wasn't it? Ark of the Covenant. And what's the Ark of the Covenant made of? Wood and gold. That's right, okay. So an icon is a bit like the Ark of the Covenant because God revealed himself through the Ark of the Covenant. An icon of Christ, we see the face of Christ. And some of them in the halo, the big one of the face of Christ in the middle there, it has the words, I am. And another one has the Greek words, O on. That's Jehovah. That's the name of God. That's the name that God revealed to Moses. So an icon, even though it's just painting on wood, is a bit like the Ark of the Covenant because God reveals himself to us through a painted image, just like he does through the written image, which is the Bible. The Bible is actually an icon. You here, seated before me, are icons. I honor you as icons of Christ. A tree is an image of God in the sense of his glory. So, and as I'll discuss a bit later, the making of an icon, not just the end product, is a bit like Noah gathering all the animals, all the things of creation into something even better and saving them in a bit. So that's like an Ark of Noah, an Ark of the Covenant. So we hollow it out. What's next? We paint nowadays with egg tempera. The oldest icons are painted with wax, but we paint with egg tempera and have done for about 1,600 years, roughly. So to paint with egg tempera, you need a smooth, absorbent surface, and this is gesso, which is a mixture of rabbit skin glue. This is dried rabbit skin glue, and a very fine white powder. This is chalk, but some countries use marble powder. But for it to stick really well, you want to put cloth on. So this is linen here. You can see all this later. This is linen first, stuck on with rabbit skin glue. So one layer of rabbit skin glue, leave it 24 hours. After 24 hours, put this cloth on, and it's open-grained. You want the gesso to get into it. And then leave that for 24 hours, and then you add a bit of rabbit skin glue. When I say rabbit skin glue, it's 15 of water to 1 of that dry stuff, so it's like a sort of a gooey liquid mixture when it's warm, and it goes like jelly when it's cold. So you paint 2 layers of that on with a bit of whiting. That's like a primer. And then, and this will take a whole day, about 8 hours, and that's why I do a lot of boards. Probably I do boards that cover about that area in a day. You put on about 20 layers of gesso, and that's quite tricky. You put a layer on, and you wait till the shininess is gone, and then you put another layer on, wait till the shininess is gone. You don't wait till it's perfectly dry, because if you put really wet gesso on really dry gesso, it'll suck the water out, and you'll get cracks. If you build one layer upon the other too quickly, you get a really thick gesso with lots of water, and as the water evaporates, what's going to happen to the thick gesso? It's going to crack, isn't it? When I tell my students, I teach the King's Foundation School of Traditional Arts, Icon School, down the road here. And we do a session in gesso making, and I warn them, get ready for tears. Things can go wrong. You get cracks and bubbles, all sorts of things. But anyway, you've got 20 layers, and then you sand it with about 9 different grits of sandpaper, about 120 right through to 1200. And you haven't even begun to paint yet. So you've made the board, you've designed it, you've put that on, you've put these layers of gesso, you haven't even begun yet. So I used to, about 30 years, made all my panels. I love woodwork, but I had so many orders, I trained my best friend Dylan to make them. So I would commission, I might commission like 10 panels, so they're all there ready to paint. I've got a bit lazy. Okay, so most icons will be gilded. That is, you put gold on. Probably about a third of the icons here are gilded. Now, the 2 ways to put gold on, and this is real gold leaf. If you've attempted to steal an icon and melt the gold down, you're not going to be a rich person. The actual gold is probably worth about £5. It's just so thin. I'll show you some gold leaf. It's really thin. You can actually see through it if you look closely enough. In the old days, it was beaten by hand. Nowadays, it's sort of beaten by hand, but they have a pneumatic thing that you've got to move the gold around. It's an interesting process. You get about 100 layers of parchment skin with little squares of gold, and you beat it, and that increases it 4 times the area. You cut those squares up into 4. Then you repeat the process. So you start with 100 layers of these little squares, you beat them, divide into 4, so you've got 4 rows of 100 then, and you beat that and you keep going. You pick it up with this. This is called a gilder's tip. So you wipe it to get static, or some say oil, grease, so you can't wash for 2 weeks before you gild. You've got to get a bit of grease on you. You pick up your gold, then you lay it down. It sounds simple, but it isn't. You get a few tears with gesso, but always you get a lot of tears learning gilding. But I'll go into the process into more detail. There are 2 ways of gilding. The simplest is simply just to put a glue down, basically. It's a varnish. You wait for, depending on the type of size it is, it might be half an hour, it might be 5 hours. And you stick the gold down, quite simple, but it doesn't really glow much. The more difficult one, you thought that 20 layers of gesso was enough. Well, I've got bad news. If you're going to water gild, it's called, where you polish it, you've got about another 8, 9, 10 layers to go. Just as Sam this is an icon I was painting to demonstrate to my students, but if I was to gild, I would gild first always and then paint. But just pretend I want to gild that. I would put another 8 or 9 layers, not of gesso, but instead of white powder, it would be a red clay called bole. So you put about 8 layers of this bole mixed with rabbit skin glue. B-O-L-E, bole. You'll see in a minute why we use this clay, and you sand that to really, really smooth surface. And then you put it on the table. I'm quite tall, so I use the high table. You get your gold picked up on your tip, and then you put some water mixed with alcohol on, vodka or gin, whichever you prefer to drink afterwards. I always make more than I need, so after the nervous process of gilding, you can treat yourself to the rest. So you have it like this, slightly at an angle. You put this puddle of water and alcohol down, then you immediately drop your gold down. Now the strange thing is, there's an attraction between the water and alcohol and the gold. So as you come closer, from about there, it'll snatch the gold off. That's when the tears begin while you're learning. If you lower like that bit of gold is going to grab first, and this bit of gold will stay. So you've got to be perfectly parallel. I tell my students to go that close, stop, take a breath, then drop like that. So a lot can go wrong. You can split the gold, all sorts of things. So you keep doing that, putting water down, laying the gold, going around like that. And now I'll tell you why it's clay. Have any of you made a clay pot? I used to do it as a child. You make a clay pot, and you wait till it's half dry, then you polish it with a teaspoon or a bit of metal. Have you ever done any of that? Oh, you ought to. It's wonderful. Hands up who've worked with clay. Hands up. Well, half of you, that's pretty good. The other half of you haven't lived yet. God made you from clay. Do you know what the word Adam means? It means red earth. My spiritual father, when I was younger, said that if you want to know God, you must know the earth from which you came. We're all trees, aren't we? We're designed to have our leaves in heaven, but our roots in the earth. So get your hands dirty. It's really important. I mean, it's one reason why we have so many neuroses these days among young people. And how many young kids, garden or get their hands dirty? Perhaps if they play football, they get dirty, but nowadays, actually, with AstroTurf, they don't even get dirty. But it's really important. To be rooted in the earth is important. Anyway, so we've got the gold, and the reason for the clay is that it has a bit of softness to it because we wet it, and we now start polishing the gold. There are different shapes. This is I call it a spade. There's another one called a dog tooth. And you polish it. Can anyone think why the clay underneath is so important? Yeah, it's a cushion, yeah. If I just put the gold straight on this hard surface, what would happen if I tried to polish it? It would scratch the gold, yeah. But the tricky thing is, if I start polishing too early, when the gold is too soft, I'm going to rip the gold. If I wait too long, the bowl's hardened and I'm going to scratch it. And you can't say after 1 hour, 30 minutes polish, because it depends how much water you put on, depends on the day, if it's really hot or very mild. So you just got to feel it. Sometimes I just tap. If it's a high note, you can start crying because you waited too long. If it's really dull, it's too moist. So it's just the right sound. Also, just start to rub it without any pressure, just to feel, you feel it sort of dragging if it's too wet. So all sorts of little tricks of the trade. And then you polish and polish.
If halfway round you make a mistake and something tears.
Yeah. The question is, if you're halfway round, then something tears. The very best gilding is done with 2 layers. So there's forgiveness, so you can carry on. So when you do 2 layers, called double gilding, you would stagger the joins, because when you have 2 layers of gold, and the gold is slightly transparent and the red shows through. If you have 2 layers, obviously there's less red showing through. So when you put the second layer on, you put a gold over that join, so that makes it nice and smooth. So you've gilded. Water gilding always goes over the edge. So just pretend I haven't painted this, but I would etch the outline, gild, and then from the etched outline, made with a little stylus, I would know where to scratch the gold off. So I've just got pure gold, pure white there, and I paint on that. So, what do you paint with? I just love natural things. Just this morning I was thinking of what 3 things, I like the number 3, 3 things to have in mind about the technique of icons. Number 1, that they are used. Icons are used. They're not just to stay in the wall and look at. So we kiss them when we come into church. We greet Christ by kissing his icon. We greet the saints by kissing them. We have processions. We splash holy water on them. We burn candles in front of them. If you've seen old icons, very often you'll find a burn. These are royal doors. They'd normally be here, open and closed. So you can see the scratches here. It's been worn out here because the priest has opened the door there. It's been loved to bits, and that's how an icon should be. Icons are a nightmare for museologists and conservators, because for them, it shouldn't be touched at all, but we love them to death. Literally, you'd find burn marks on them, and they really are used. The word liturgy means the work of the people. These are part of an orchestra, and the violinist plays his or her violin, wears it out through use. The second thing is longevity. Icons should be made with care to last at least 1,000 years. There's no reason why an icon shouldn't last 1,000 years from the materials we use. They shouldn't fade or darken. The varnish might darken, but not the paint. And thirdly, the process of making them should be a microcosm of how we're to live on this earth. God put us on this earth as prophets, priests, and like royal artists. Let's put it that way. Royal artists to rule over the world, but like an artist rules over his or her pigments, to make them more beautiful, to make them even more beautiful. A prophet, because we listen to God. I have in my room an illuminated manuscript I painted of the crucifixion, and there's some green peeling off. And that reminds me, I didn't listen to that pigment. It's called terre verte. And terre verte is a translucent pigment, but I stubbornly tried to make this translucent pigment opaque, so I kept putting more and more on, and it punished me. It's now peeling off, because I didn't listen, as it were, to what God was saying to me through that pigment. And a priest offers. So the icon is like us offering back to God what he's given to us, but in a transformed way. I don't give to God eggs and stones. I make them into an icon and then offer that. Okay, so the whole process of making an icon is important. So I like to use natural pigments. I'll show you some in a minute. Yeah, I've got them over there. And they're mixed with egg yolk. So I like to use organic if I can. So you separate the white from the yellow. And then you add a bit of vinegar, or if you're Russian, a bit of vodka. And you end up with a mixture like this, which is about 50% egg, 25% water, and 25% could be vinegar or white wine or something like that. I suppose it's preservative. Here, I've got the raw pigments that we use. So for my blue, I like to use azurite. This is azurite stone. For green, tend to use green earth, which is a clay basically, but also you can use malachite. And this here is an earth. So these are stones. For the more brilliant colours, stone is probably best. And this is a red ochre that needs to be ground up. Actually, this one may be for Mount Sinai. Someone went up to Mount Sinai and gave me the stone. I think it's actually Mount Sinai. Isn't that wonderful? It's got a history to it. That's why I don't think icons should be made of synthetic things and tubes. This has all got a history to it. I've got a bit of lapis lazuli that someone gave me, who wrote a wonderful book, some of you may have read it, by Victoria Findlay, called Colour. She went to Afghanistan before the war, where the best lapis lazuli is found. And she bought the best quality lapis from this particular mine and gave it to me. She interviewed me for the book. So that has a history to it for me. It's not just her factory. So you grind that up. You might smash it up first with a bronze mortar and pestle, but then to get the fine powder, you have this glass muller on glass, and you grind it and grind it and grind it really smooth. But I say really smooth, it's quite an art. There are some pigments, like vermilion or cinnabar. The more you grind them, the redder they get. I was asked by television crew who are making a program on colour if I could make some vermilion. So I made it, and I read in a book that it comes out black, but the more you grind it, the redder it gets. And it's true. It's like a miracle. We're filming this black mess. As you ground it, it got a brilliant red. Other pigments, they get less intense. So azurite, if you overgrind it, it's too light. So it's a real science. So you've got your paint, and you start painting.
So you've got powder and you've got egg yolk.
Yeah, and you mix them together.
Right.
And then you add water, depending what effect you want. Ideally, icons should be built up with semi-translucent layers. I'll tell you in a second. So you add water in, depending on the effect you want. If you want an opaque finish, like the very last thing you put on the face were almost pure white lines. So you want this quite opaque. But all the other layers, I'll show you now, are semi-translucent. So you'd have more water in that. Egg tempera is wonderful stuff. It dries in a minute, and you can build up layer upon layer. So most of the icons around here might have up to 20 layers. Now, the great thing about this translucency is, can you imagine, let's just look at this white here. There's no paint, so white, all the light hits it and comes to you. If you put translucent layers on, some of the light strikes that, let's just say it's a red. Some of the light will hit the red and come and go to your retina, But some of that will go through that translucent red, like a stained glass window, hit the white, and come back out from inside the paint. So instead of bouncing off the surface, it comes from behind the paint, bouncing off that. That's called transmitted light. So the stained glass window behind you, what we see there is transmitted light. The light comes through the red glass, or that one up there. That's why it's a bit disappointing when you see something in the computer screen. It's so brilliant, isn't it, and saturated. If you took a photograph of that, the photograph only has reflected light. It's not so intense. So an icon tries, I think anyway, should try to have this transfigured light. In other words, it's light mingled with matter. You see what I'm getting? If it were really opaque layers of paint, then all the light is reflected off the surface. So you're trying to depict a transfigured person who is matter and the Holy Spirit mingled together like a red-hot iron or like a stained glass window. There are two ways to paint. One is called the pro-plasmos technique. Pro means first and plasmos means layer. So you put a dark, let's look at the face. You put a dark layer down first, and then you gradually build up highlights. But you leave the dark layer unpainted by highlights if you want that to remain a shadow. You can't see that very well, but that's red. But now we start mixing yellow and white. You can see that those shadows there are just the brown left untouched. So gradually you add more and more white to the yellow ochre. It's a bit like a relief map. When I was young, I used to like making relief maps. So you would cut a shape out, then you make another shape a bit smaller, another shape a bit smaller, you glue them on. So it's like a sort of a step pyramid. It's a bit like that. So here, more white, but smaller area. Keep doing that until you end up with, it's like a cooking thing, isn't it? You bring the finishing out of the oven. So yeah, that's the completed one. And then you add little bits of red and all sorts of things. So you start with dark and go toward light. Does anyone know when the Jewish day begins? What? Evening. Okay. The Jewish day begins with darkness and ends with light. So the icon, at least this type of painting, this pro-plasmos technique, starts with dark and you're moving toward light. An interesting thing about garments, actually you can see it better in this one here of St. Benedict. I mentioned earlier that the process of painting an icon has significance, not just the end product. I love it how in the Genesis account of creation, there's chaos in the beginning. The world was without form and void. Then God creates more and more order. I used to think that the chaos was left behind and all you end up with is pure order. In other words, I was thinking of it linearly. Day 1, day 2, day 3, etc. I'm thinking of it now vertically. So the chaos is boiling away underneath everything and throwing possibilities up. So mutations are like that. In the genetic pool, you get lots of these variations, chaotic variations, most of which are useless, but the odd one is useful. So the first layer can be a bit chaotic. You can see here, I deliberately haven't made it too tidy. If you make the first layer really tidy, then everything ends up being a bit boring, really. So the first layer can be quite puddly. You can even literally puddle it. So I'd put the icon flat, have really watered pigment, and puddle it on. So it's a bit sort of messy. Translucent part, slightly less translucent. And then gradually, you get crisper and crisper. That's like day 2 or day 3. You can see I'm using yellow on top of the green. Gradually getting more and more highlights. Then adding a bit more white, I think, to the yellow and green. And then some almost whites at the end. But underneath that is sort of a chaotic pro-plasmos. You can see here, if I move it around, you might see that's gold on the wings and there. That's called a ceast. So what I described earlier was putting gold on the background. This is different. We painted the image, then we put gold on top. And that can be done either with shell gold, called shell, because in the old days they'd put it in a seashell. That's basically watercolour, but it's powdered gold, real gold, mixed with gum arabic, so you paint it on. The other method is to put on gold size, which is like a varnish, really. You put that on, wait for it to almost dry, put loose gold leaf on, and brush it vigorously, so all the gold comes off except where it sticks onto your size. So one of the reasons for having gold mixed with, normally it's on a sort of an earthy colour, is because God intended us not just to be good humans, but to be what's called deified, to be full of the Holy Spirit, to be iron mingled with fire. That's why we come up to Pentecost on Sunday. That's the height of the year in many ways, where the Holy Spirit came down and dwelt within the disciples, dwelt within all those who love God. So they cease to be merely human. They're humans who are radiant with God's presence. That's, of course, the meaning of halos. All the icons here have halos because the light's shining through them. So even though a tree or a bit of furniture obviously can't partake of God in the same way a human can, you'll notice in some of the icons here there are assist. I might have had it on the Pentecost icon over there, I can't remember. But sometimes you'll have inanimate matter mingled with light, and that's because everything can reveal something of God to us. Can anyone remember what happened? How did God meet Moses when he was a shepherd? Something here with a bush. The burning. Did the bush get consumed by the fire? No. So obviously what Moses saw, this bush burning without being consumed, that fire was divine fire. It was God revealing himself to Moses through the bush. So it was just matter, but God is light and fire coming through matter. I'll just start 5 more minutes, then we'll stop so you can actually, we're going to have questions, so then you can have time to look. This is a partially finished icon of St. Peter. Garments are very interesting in icons. A well-painted garment should follow certain rational laws, like the knee is going forward, so that's more of a highlighted. The drapery should relate to the forces that cause it. If it curves, it's because something's pulling it or pushing it. But on the other hand, obviously it's not like a photograph. And that's because an icon shows the world transfigured. I talked earlier about how the human person isn't created just to be a good, balanced human, but to be a God-bearer. Christophoros means Christ-bearer. So there's something about the way icons paint garments which sort of suggests this radiance of God filling the whole of creation, and the very last thing you put on a white highlight, it's like light flashing through things. So I'll just finish with some illuminated manuscripts. These are actually facsimiles, but just wanted to make the point that icons are in different mediums. As Father Stephen said, I work in different mediums, and I mentioned earlier that the icon is part of liturgy. So depending on its function, it might be made of wood. Our gospel icon, that others, the gospel book, has a cover on it made of silver, and I think gold plated, because it's touched a lot. If it were painted, it would wear out. In some processions, we have a cloth with the image of Christ in the tomb, and that represents the shroud he was wrapped in. So obviously that's got to be cloth, and it normally would have an embroidery on it. If I paint on a wall, that's a different sort of paint. At the moment, I'm painting an axe about as big as that one, and it's a half sphere. So I was there up until midday today with my assistant, Mark, there he is, over there. So we're using a different medium then, other than ink tempera. Sometimes we use mosaic. So this was a Bible I was involved in making. It's called the St John's Bible, not because it's only the Gospel of John, but it was commissioned by university and monastery in America. This is an example of a sort of old and new. I did the figure of St. Paul, but the background was done by Donald Jackson, who was in charge of the project. So they tried to combine new and old, as it were. The emphasis here was on St. Paul's missionary travels. So that's why you've got a boat there, and you've got new and old cities. He travels around cities preaching. So that illustrates another fact that, as I said, the iconographer isn't just out for their ego. So often you work in teams. I'm working with my assistant Mark, and another student will come later. So there'll be 3 of us working on this app, some painting. This Bible had about 50 people working on it. This illustration here is an example. Just to do the lettering, I think it's the first time in 500 years the Bible's been done by hand and illustrated. This is the actual size of it, and it was all vellum. This is a facsimile, but it's all vellum. See this thing here? This is, I think, about six people were involved in this. I designed it and painted the figure of the sower. It's the parable of the sower, and painted what you see there. But someone else did the lettering, someone else did the gilding, someone else did the frame, and you can see here that the seed is actually falling into the lettering here. So when you're reading the Bible, you realize actually that's the seed that he's talking about. And the seed is actually gold, slightly raised gold. So when you look at it, you can see the light reflecting off the golden seed because it's the Word of God. So that's and then someone else did the lettering. And I think Donald did the A here. So altogether, might be about 8 people involved just in that area then. Now this is, here we are. You see this bird here. Can anyone guess what's happening here? It's a bird with a string and a line of lettering underneath. Can anyone guess why that's there? A calligrapher made a mistake and left a line out. So I was asked to design something to put it back in its place. So its beak is pointing to the missing line, and that's the correct line there. I prayed that they make more mistakes, but unfortunately not. There's actually one other mistake, but there are 6 volumes altogether, and this volume was the only one that had 2 mistakes. So anyway, a bit of humour there. Okay, that's all I'd like to say. Are there any questions? Yes, sir.
What immediate advice would you give to someone who wants to be more than a glorified photocopier or a mere transcriber from one medium to another?
Yeah, the question was, what advice would I give to an iconographer who doesn't just want to be a glorified photocopier? In other words, someone who lives in the tradition and isn't just copying. I think initially copying with intelligence is a good way to learn, but it's only the beginning. I think first of all, become really skillful, so you know how to adapt and adjust. Secondly, live the life of the church so that if you've got to design a new icon like St. Lawrence, one has a sense of St. Lawrence because you're living the life of the church. But then you have a lot of skill how to express what the commissioner wants. Also a bit of courage. Sometimes commissioners get a bit too particular. You know, what's his left toenail blue or something like that. Yeah, okay, I know what you want, what effect you want, but, we've got to do it this way, not that way. So you need a bit of courage to sort of stand up for what is best, despite the commissioner might wanting something else. Know your tradition, because no one person has enough experience in their lifetime to make a good icon. You're drawing like a good scientist. I mean, Einstein's theory of relativity didn't come out of the blue. He drew together all sorts of different theories and saw the pattern, and his formulae brought things together that had already been there. So, like a good writer, they've got to have a good vocabulary. So you've got to know your history of iconography. I'm really keen myself on reviving our own iconography in Britain. We tend to think of icons as Russian or Byzantine, don't we? Well, Britain had a really rich tradition up to about, I would say, the 12th century. Then it became more emotional, perhaps, but more artistic in the modern sense of the artists putting themselves forward. In fact, the fresco I'm painting at the moment, or the secco, is inspired by the Romanesque tradition. So 12th century English, Spanish. So that's one thing I'm keen on doing, is reviving that tradition, hopefully not making pastiches, but getting away just from endless copying of good Russian or Greek works. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much for your talk. It was very interesting. You spoke of the durability, longevity of icons. What is the oldest known icon?
The question is, what is the oldest known icon? The word icon means image, so in that we need to include the other media. So the oldest known image are the frescoes, probably in Rome, images on the wall with the catacombs. They're about 2nd, 3rd century. The oldest panel icon is about 6th century, and that's in Mount Sinai and in Rome. Ironically, they survived in Mount Sinai, St. Catherine's, because at the time of iconoclasm, when in the Christian world people were destroying images, thinking they're bad, St. Catherine's at that time was in a Muslim country. It had been invaded by the Arabs, and though the Arabs are iconoclastic, the so-called Christian iconoclasts couldn't get to St. Catherine's because it was Muslim hands. So, ironically, it was protected for that reason. So they're the oldest panel icons, but then you have carved icons on sarcophagi. They're about early 4th century. But one of the oldest house churches in the world, or the oldest house, is actually in Britain. And that has wall paintings, we think probably the family, because they all got, I think, reddish hair, and there's an adult lady and a man and children, and they're all standing praying. So we think it's the Christian family. I know it's Christian because it's got the Chi Rho, the first 2 letters of Christ in Greek. So they're probably about mid-4th century, perhaps 300, not quite sure. They're now, I think, in the British Museum, but originally there are 2 such early Christian house churches. One is Hinton St Mary and Devon, I think, or Dorset, and the other one is, I can't remember the name. But that's right, Luddingston, that's it, yeah. And the mosaic of Christ in the centre with all sorts of creatures around, that's in the British Museum now, but that was in one of those villas. Yes?
Can I ask you, is there anything to say about hands? How the hands have been?
Yes, the question is about hands. Hands are really important. As a sculptor, I realised that the extremities are the most expressive. So, of course, when you smile, it means that the end of your lips change. If you've got grief, the end of the eyebrow goes up. If someone's nervous, they express it with their fingers or even the toes. So the hands are really expressive. So they're very obvious symbols like the symbol of Christ's blessing or priest's blessing, that's ICXC, or sometimes like that, it's the Holy Trinity, the 2 natures of Christ. That is called the orans, that's an image of prayer. The earliest images, or some of the earliest images we have from the catacombs are people like that, praying, interceding. Yes, exactly. Our Lady of the Sign there, that's an example. Just looking around at other... It's interesting, the icon of Christ crucified, you don't see contorted figures in Orthodox depictions of the crucifixion. We have an icon of the crucifixion of the scenes. Because Christ willed to die, didn't have to die. I mean, he's the only human being that didn't have to die, because he's God as well. He gave himself willingly to death. Peter said, let's draw our swords and kill the people who are trying to take you away. And he said, I could call down a host of angels to defend me, but I'm not going to. So he gives himself to death. So he's not hanging down as a defeated person. He's embracing death. And his hands aren't sort of clenched. They're quite like that. They're sort of gentle. And he's embracing willingly to overcome death. There is other examples of hands. Now, it's interesting. Before I became Orthodox, I was a sculptor, a Christian, trying to express something of the spiritual nature of the human person. I was experimenting and looking at other religious works. And I noticed most of them had a slight elongation. And I noticed that in hands and icons, though the hand isn't elongated, the fingers are. So normally our fingers start about, whatever that is, 5/8 of the way out. But in an icon, they start in the middle. So everything's a bit elongated. The fingers seem a bit elongated. The nose is a bit elongated. So the organs of reception in icons tend to be a bit enlarged. So the eyes are a bit enlarged, the nose a bit elongated, the ears, if they're exposed, a bit larger. But the organs of expression, the lips and the gestures, are more sort of low-key, because the saint is someone who listens to God, smells fragrances of paradise, sees the Lord. So that fills them with wisdom. so that they can more readily express wisely. So the gestures, thought it was me for a while, but the gestures are always meaningful and not exaggerated. You don't get violent gestures. Any other questions? Otherwise, we'll leave it there. You can ask me later. Okay. One more, and then we'll stop. It's important you see the icons. Yes?
So, I understand they're not photographs, the icons.
Yeah.
So sometimes we see clothes that don't, like Christ with bishop's clothes.
Yes.
But I'm more confused, what are the standard clothes? Why are they wearing these clothes? Where did they come from? These just garments? Are they because of tradition? They're not modern clothes. What are they?
Yeah. Good question. So those who didn't hear, he's asking about the clothing, what meaning do clothes have? They are very meaningful. So when we had the Archbishop here, we had Christ as the Archbishop. So Bishop Callistos, a great teacher of our time now past, he said that one is bishop, some are bishops. Oh, he actually talked about priests, I'll rephrase that. One is priest, some are priests, and all are priests. So only one person is priest, that's Christ. He's the high priest. He ordains, as it were, some priests, like Father Stephen. So we say some are priests. I'm not a priest. But yet all are priests. We're all called to the priesthood. So in that case, because it's above the bishop's throne, he's the high priest. Whereas other cases, the one behind you, which is the most common combination, yes, a blue outer garment, which is his divinity, blue is heavenly. Underneath that is a red earth red garment, which is his humanity. The word Adam means red earth, basically. So there, it's symbolic. The Mother of God has the same colours, but the other way around. So Christ is God by nature and become man by grace. We, through the Mother of God, are the other way around. We're human by nature, and we receive divinity, receive the Holy Spirit by grace. So here goes the other way around, blue on the inside, red on the outside. A martyr, like Justina here, normally has some red, a bright red, the red for their blood spilt for Christ. A monk, like that's St Anthony there, they have earthy colours. You wouldn't find them a bright blue normally or bright red. They have earthy colours because we're all called to be humble, but they live a poor life. They don't accumulate riches. So the colours have significance. The garments a priest now wear, and you normally see bishops in, are, on the whole, the court dress in Byzantium or in early Roman times. And basically the priestess kept wearing what everyone else used to wear, but so as styles changed, they didn't. So they become ecclesiastical, but really they were just the day-to-day wear of important people in the Roman Empire. Angels are the same. This, what he's wearing there, elements of this design you see here, you'll see that in Byzantine court paintings. Sort of courtiers might wear something like that. Well, thank you very much, everyone, and enjoying this coffee there, tea there, and enjoy the icons. We've got a whole hour, just over half an hour to enjoy them, and we're open tomorrow as well. Thank you.